and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my June wrap-up. So this past month I read 18 books, which is a little bit wild. I usually don't read this much, but things have been going on at work, and by things I mean I haven't been doing much at work, so I've had a lot of time to read. I'm super happy about having read that many books because that means I get to share them all with you. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. The first book that I read this month was Stay Sweet by Siobhan Vivian, and I gave that book 5 stars. So most of my friends rated this book 3 or lower, which I don't really understand. I thought there was a lot to love about this fun, summery, contemporary book. It's about a girl named Amelia as she is trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. She is working in a kind of historic ice cream stand run by a woman in her town for the past 50 or so years, and she is, hanging out with her friends working on this ice cream stand, and something kind of goes awry and she has to fix that, if that makes sense. Most of the plot I can't really go into because it's kind of spoilery, but the setting of this book was so rich and beautiful. I loved the history behind the ice cream stand. This is the exact sort of historical fiction I like to read, where there's some history behind something in this town or something of that nature. I don't like reading a true historical fiction, but a little historical element. We love that. I thought Amelia was a really fun character. I think at times she was a little bit naive, but I overall was rooting for her, and I liked her ambition and just her sweetness. I also really liked the love interest in this. I know a lot of people, that was their main issue. They didn't find the love interest convincing. I thought he was super sweet, and I don't know where people get the impression that he's a bad guy, but I really enjoyed this. The only thing I didn't like was that the best friend was super fucking shitty. She was so not a good friend, and I think there needs to be more representation, I guess you could say, of friendships that end because there is a shitty friend. It is okay to lose friends sometimes, and it's, I feel very realistic when you are in high school and younger to gain friends, lose friends, make new friends along the way. So I kind of wish that had been more appropriately done in this book, because the friend, she did not deserve that redemption that she got. But regardless, I gave this book 4 stars. It's something that I'm definitely going to be rereading because I just love how sweet it was. The next book that I read this month was Ace of Shades by Amanda Foody, and I gave this book 3 stars. This is the classic tale of a dumbass trying to find their lost parent. Why is this a trope? It's about a girl named Anne who decides to go to this place that's sort of like Vegas. It's like a fake Vegas, if you will. And she's trying to find her mama, but her mama is not who she thinks she is. Her mom is kind of going against the government, she finds out, as she's trying to find her mother. And to find her mom, she has to get in cahoots with this mob boss, and shit doesn't go as planned, clearly. I thought the pacing of this was pretty glacial, which was my main issue with it. It felt like it was moving and plotting so slowly. That being said, I think the characterization and the individual personalities of the characters was done incredibly well. I really liked that the relationship that was starting to develop seemed like it made sense. I feel a lot of the time in fantasy books, there's not a whole lot of build-up besides an enemies to lovers situation. This wasn't like that. There was a lot of good build-up, and I appreciated that. But if I'm being honest, it was just a little bit too gritty for me. I prefer my fantasies to be kings and queens and murder and intrigue rather than the oi Mr. Yumi Dad type fantasies where everybody's being blackmailed or whatever, kind of Six of Crows-esque. I find myself not really liking those kind of stories. But if you're into that shit, you like Peaky Blinders or whatever, I think you'll really enjoy this book. I thought the magic system was super interesting and unique. I've never read anything like it, so it wasn't a bad book. It just wasn't my favorite. Probably won't continue on with the series. The next book I read this month is Starting from Scratch by Jane Northcote. This is a romance, a contemporary romance, and I give it 3 stars. I had high hopes for this one because it had a trans main character and the author is also trans, so I was really excited to read an Own Voices trans romance. And don't get me wrong, I think the representation here was really, really good, but the story itself was just kind of okay. It's about a boy named Ben who goes to college after taking a gap year and trying to kind of figure himself out, figure his life out. He's just gotten top surgery and he's excited to go back to university. Everybody just thinks that he is a cisgendered man and he doesn't feel like he needs to come out to his roommates or whatever, but it does fill him with a lot of anxiety. That's kind of a really big plot point in the book. Ends up falling for this guy named Sid, and Sid most of the book believes that Ben is cis, and then later finds out that Ben is not cis and doesn't have an issue with it. And it's kind of sweet. I really liked how accepting Sid was and didn't question a thing. He was just very go with the flow, really, just a supportive guy. But unfortunately, the characters themselves felt very flat to me. It felt like I was reading the summary of a book. The characters never felt fleshed out. Everything was kind of told oh, this happened last week. The writing was a little bit stilted for me. I also think it's pretty important to note that Ben is very dysphoric, and this comes up mentally a lot in sexual settings, which is probably very true to some people's trans experience. However, I think it could be very triggering if you are trans, you do experience dysphoria, to read about that in a romance. Sometimes I think romances are for the escapism aspect, and I'm not saying it should be excluded from this book. I just think that it can be very hard to read for some people, and for me it was hard to read about, and I'm not even dysphoric, so I'm sure for certain trans people this is probably going to be very difficult to read. Overall, I just wish there had been a little bit more levity and lightheartedness to this romance and a little bit more thought into the details. The next book I read this month was The Upside of Unrequited by Becky Albertalli. I gave this book 3 stars. So begins the audiobooks, though, that I have read this month. I read a ton of books, and this one kind of kicked things off in a very lackluster sense. The book felt realistically high school, but the main premise behind this book was not one that I personally related to as much as I thought that I would relate to. I romanticize people, and I've had plenty of moments of unrequited love, and for some reason I thought that this story would be one that I related to, but it ended up being just a story of, like, this girl getting mad at her sister for having a girlfriend, and then just, I don't know, there was like a love triangle. It was kind of silly, but that was basically the plot of the story. In general, I just felt Molly was kind of an immature character. I don't think she was bad, and I think that she was realistic. I just didn't really enjoy, like, the jealousy aspect of it when it came to her twin sister, and I think she kind of, like, waffled between the two men for too long, even though it was clear that she preferred one over the other. It's not a bad book, I just don't think it needed to exist. The next book I read this month was Alex Approximately by Jen Bennett. I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed this audiobook. Thought this was a really fun summer contemporary about a girl who is really in love with movies, has a cinephile pen pal that's anonymous. She doesn't know who he is. And she also goes to live with her father, I believe, the summer after her junior year, and he lives in California, so it's a new setting for her, and she decides that she's gonna find a summer job. That was all very convoluted. She gets a summer job at this local, like, museum / historical home, and she makes friends and maybe falls in love. Oh shit, the guy that she hates that works at her job, it actually ends up being her pen pal. That's not a spoiler, it's actually on, like, the jacket flap of the book. But I really just loved this book. I loved how the California setting felt, I don't want to say authentic, like, I haven't been to this part of California, but it felt like you were really there. I feel like I could smell the ocean water. I loved the setting. I liked the cast of characters. Each character felt so individual and so real. I really, really, really liked Bailey. I liked her personality. I liked that she had real flaws, and I liked the conflict in this book. The 3 main conflicts, at least, didn't feel overwrought. They didn't feel unrealistic. I'm not saying that, like, every conflict in a contemporary is ridiculous, but a lot of them fucking are, let's be real. I thought the romance was pretty hot, too, so, like, I believe there was sex in this too, which is kind of wild for, like, a YA contemporary. That feel like that never happens. But overall, it was a really good book. The next 3 books that I read all kind of, like, fall in the same category because they're from the same series. I read Falling Kingdoms, Frozen Tides, and Crystal Storm by Morgan Rhodes. I gave these books 4 stars, 4 stars, and 3 stars respectively. This was my foray into drawer-dropping goodness. I love these books. I love these audiobooks. So these are books 3 through 5 of the Falling Kingdom series by Morgan Rhodes, and I'm not really going to get into the plot because these are, like, you know, sequels in a series, but in essence, it's like Game of Thrones for babies. I think Madam Morgan Rhodes is, like, losing steam a little bit. I think the series is getting a little bit worse as time goes on, but the high-stakes relationship drama in My Scarred Bay, Magnus, he really carries the series on his back and makes me want to continue to read. I will probably end up finishing the series sometime in July, and I'm looking forward to it. The next 2 books I read are part of a duology, and it is Written with You and Written with Regret by Ellie Martinez. I gave these books both 4 stars. All aboard the Hot Mess Express. Final destination, this duology. This is a dark contemporary romance duology whose first chapter opens with a baby being left on a doorstep at a rager. I mean, what gets better than that? The single dad, who is the owner of the aforementioned doorstep, is left to take care of this baby, who is the result of a one-night stand gone wrong. And I don't mean the baby is what went wrong. I mean that the baby mama, the one-night stand, she ends up, like, stealing all of his shit, and then left him with the baby. But surprise, guess who comes back 4 years later and wants to reconnect with her child? Obviously, these books are messy, and obviously, I think if you are really into psychological thrillers and you like really well plotted things, like, this probably is not the series for you. It's ridiculous, it's campy, it's dramatic, it's so improbable it would never happen in real life, but I fucking ate this up. Haven't read a dark romance, I believe, at all this year, so this was the perfect thing to, like, kick off my dark romance reading with. I just enjoyed it. It was, like, so stupid, but so fun. And I also think that despite the improbable plot, I really liked the way that Ellie Martinez characterized her characters. I keep saying characterized. Like, the way that she wrote the characters, she did a really good job at making me feel for their relationship, feel for their individual struggles, and I think that they were able to help each other overcome their struggles collectively together. It wasn't like the woman was fixing the man, like, they fixed each other, and that was pretty cute. Also, the doorstep baby, pretty cute as well. So I don't know that I would recommend these books, but, like, I loved them. They were great. The next book that I read this month was The Simple Wild by K.A. Tucker, and I also gave this book 4 stars. I'll preface this by saying, besides it being set in Alaska, I really knew nothing about this book going into it, and it was a really pleasant read. I think for me, I'm always kind of, like, hesitant to read new adult books that are highly publicized. I don't know. Like, I always like to read the shitty ones on Amazon. So this one I was like, is it gonna be smutty? Like, what's the deal here? I don't know. But it's a story about a girl named Kala who has led this really privileged and sheltered life in Canada, and she gets a call. I think she's like 26 at the time, 24, 26. She gets a call from someone who knows her dad, and they're like, hey, your dad has cancer, you need to come to Alaska. And she's like, I don't want to fucking go to Alaska, but like, I need to go see my dad. She has not seen her dad since she was 3 years old. Her mom left because her dad never wanted to leave Alaska, and Alaska is kind of like a barren wasteland. So she flies out to Alaska, she meets her dad, they reconnect. The story is really about Calla reconnecting with her father, and also meeting this guy who like works for her father. His name's Jonah, and falling for Jonah. This book was really good. I thought the way that the familial relationship was handled was really, really excellent. I like stories that center around family in addition to having a romance, and I also like that the romance didn't feel like it was just brushed to the side. It didn't feel underdeveloped at all, and the ending to me was so sweet. It was just like the icing on the cake to this story, and I felt like it ended just super realistically, so I really enjoyed this book. There is some good sexy times, so I wasn't let down in that regard. If you're looking for a unproblematic new adult book, I really would recommend this one. The next book I read this month was The Art of Losing by Lizzie Mason, and I gave this book 4 stars. I hope y'all are ready for heavy shit, because for some ungodly reason, all the books that I checked out for my library for the latter half of this month are grade A depressing. The premise of this book is that Harley's little sister ends up hooking up with her boyfriend, and Harley walks in on it. It's not a great sitch. Harley leaves her sister at this party because she's like, honestly, fuck you, bitch, which like relatable, sure, but she gets driven home by her boyfriend, now ex-boyfriend. He's an alcoholic, and he crashes the vehicle, and Audrey's sister ends up going into a coma. And it's about Harley grappling with the fact that she's got some issues with her sister, some pent-up issues, and also like this new issue with her sister, but she also loves her sister, doesn't want her to be in a fucking coma. And it's also about her dealing with people in her life who have alcoholism. I thought the depiction of addiction was incredibly well done in this book, and I also think that the sister relationship was also incredibly well done. I enjoyed how there were no moral absolutisms offered when it comes to drinking culture and alcoholism, but it definitely paints a picture of how some people are very unrepentant about their behavior, and how some people are really trying to change their life, but it's fucking hard when you are truly addicted to something. I think my favorite part of this book was Harley's inner dialogue about her sister and about the sibling relationship. I felt so sympathetic towards her in how she kind of felt like she was sometimes in the shadow of her little sister, but she loved her little sister, and it just felt so real to me, and I think anyone that has a really strong sibling bond will really relate to this book and understand what Harley is going through. I also really enjoyed the side characters in this. Unlike Stay Sweet by Siobhan Vivian, I think that Harley has a really good support system. Her best friend is awesome. She's always there for Harley, so I really, really enjoyed that. Even though this book was dark, it definitely felt hopeful. I just thoroughly enjoyed it. I think if you don't mind heavier topics, you would really enjoy this book. And now on to my favorite book of the month, and maybe even the year. I read Birthday by Meredith Russo. I gave this book 5 stars. Words cannot describe how much I love this book. Like, it's so good, you have to fucking pick it up. It's about a trans girl named Morgan who's growing up in the South with her best friend who's born on the same day as her. His name is Eric. This book is called Birthday because Eric and Morgan meet up every year on their birthday to celebrate together, or at least come together in some sense. I think this book perfectly balances the seriousness and hardship of growing up trans in the South with the lightheartedness of unflinching and unfailing first love. There is a suicide attempt in this book. There is a lot of internalized hate from Morgan, and at times it is truly difficult to read about. I would definitely say, again, trigger warning for that suicide attempt, and also just for the feeling of dysphoria that Morgan experiences multiple times throughout the book. But I think there is this pervasive feeling of hope the entire time you're reading, and especially near the end. And there's a part near the end of the book where pronouns come up. I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I straight up started sobbing at work, so that was a really good time. In general, if you want a book with a really stunning love story at the heart of it, and amazing own voices trans rep, and this quality of unputdownableness, pick this book up. Just do it. The next book I read this month was my other 5-star read. I didn't have any other 5-star reads this month besides this one, and it is The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics by Olivia Waite. Hello, sapphic astronomer and artist. This book was so much fun. It was a female-female historical romance about fighting misogyny, fighting the patriarchy, doing what you want, being a badass lady in science, or being a badass artist. It was about a girl named Lucy who comes to live with her like patron or whatever, Catherine, and they kiss, and it's just a good time. I loved how supportive they were of each other. I just really loved it, and I love how they came together, and it was sexy and cute. And this definitely isn't like a lighthearted Tessa Dare type historical romance, but if you want a historical romance with like a plot, you want it to feel sort of Jane Austen-esque, you definitely should give this one a try. It was really good. Okay, moving on to 2 of my least favorite books this month. I read Summerbird Blue by Kemi Dawn Bowman and The Past and Other Things That Should Stay Buried by Sean David Hutchinson, and I'm grouping these together because they both deal with grief. I listened to both of these on audio. I gave the first one 3 stars and I gave the second one 2 stars. When I tell you I'm tired, I mean it. I'm sick and tired of bum-ass annoying characters. First book, Summerbird Blue by Kemi Dawn Bowman, is about a girl named Rumi whose sister dies in a car accident and she is sent to Hawaii to go and live with her aunt because her mom is grieving and needs time to grieve on her own. And this makes Rumi fucking ragey. She is mean and angry this entire book. She is unable to sympathize with her mother who is going through it, obviously. Is constantly thinking about her sister and feeling guilty that she didn't die. But my issue is that, like, it was so repetitive. This book probably could have been like 100 pages and done the same thing in that 100 pages that it did in like the 300 pages that it took up. I will say the one real redeeming factor for me was that the plotline at least was like fairly continuous, made sense, whatever. And also I loved the Arrow Ace rep in this. I thought it was really, really good. It didn't feel judgmental. Everybody around Rumi, when she kind of tried to tell people like, hey, like, I don't want to date anyone, everybody was very supportive and was like, go your own way. You don't have to label it if you don't want to label it yet. It felt really authentic and true and awesome, and I loved that. The rep was what gave this book 3 stars for me, and the overall story wasn't horrible, but the internal dialogue of Rumi was just so hard to read about. She was just so angry the whole time. I would definitely be interested in reading more books by Kemi Dawn Bowman, but like this first one just wasn't for me. The next audiobook that I listened to was Past and Other Things That Should Stay Buried by Sean David Hutchinson. This audiobook took me 2 hours to listen to, but it felt like I was listening to Priory of the Orange Tree. This is my first Sean David Hutchinson book, and I think that's why I was so disappointed. I know this is not considered his best work by any means, but I didn't expect to be this disappointed in it. There was no point to this book besides the character names, which were put there to annoy me. Dino, like dinosaur, and July. July was kind of homophobic. Dino was kind of like into himself and just very selfish. I didn't like any of these characters. They suck. And they were our main 2 protagonists. Also, the kind of like body horror that's in this disgusted me personally. I felt like there was just genuinely no point. There was no takeaway that I really felt from this, and I think with contemporary, you either like really, really enjoy it and you really take something from it, or it's kind of fucking useless to you. And for me, like, this was just kind of useless. It just kind of did nothing. So I didn't enjoy this, and I wouldn't recommend it. Now finally, let's talk about The Two Bats in the Room. I read Fix Her Up by Tessa Bailey, and I gave this book 3 stars. There was a lot to love about this book, and I'm not talking about Travis's package. The more that I think about that, there actually wasn't that much to love about this book, except for the smutty scenes. I think this book looks a lot like a regular contemporary with like the illustrated cover, and so you're expecting a certain level of smut, but it really ratchets it up. Like, it is very dirty. There's a lot of dirty talk present, and I thought that that was all fun and good and great. I just didn't really like either of the characters, and I didn't like the tropes that were employed in this book, and I think that's definitely honestly, I'm not even gonna say it's a me thing. I think it's definitely the book thing. I didn't like it. I didn't like how the main character, Georgie's family, did not take her seriously. She was a grown-ass adult woman, and her parents were just, I don't know, kind of horrible, and so were her siblings. Maybe this is something that's very true to the younger sibling experience, but I found it just horrible to read about. Like, I don't know, contemporaries are supposed to be lighthearted and fun, contemporary romance at least, and this was just not that. I also really hated how Georgie was so into Travis. It was this kind of like, I've loved you since I was a kid thing, and Travis is only starting to see her in a sexual light now. And when I say see her in a sexual light, that's kind of all he sees in her, at least for the first like majority of this book. He's starting to figure out like, oh, she's not that silly kid that used to hang around, she's something else. But the whole naive virgin, unrequited love thing just really doesn't work for me personally. I understand in the real world that people's feelings are not necessarily equitable, but it just felt really skeevy to me, and also coupled with the fact that Travis infantilizes her by calling her baby girl all the time. It was like, wait, so you're supposed to be the one that doesn't see her as a child baby person, and yet you're calling her baby girl like every 5 seconds? What? It's like she's trying to feel more adult, and yet we're calling her a child, a baby. I didn't like it. I just didn't like it. Every once in a while, a baby girl here and there, fine, but like the whole time, it's like, what's her name? Oh, Nana. Like, what's her fucking name? In the end, I just wasn't convinced of Travis's sudden feelings towards Georgie, and I didn't like the lack of true resolution I felt between Georgie and her family. I feel like they should have come in hard with the apologies on like never treating her like an adult. I was listening to this on audio, so maybe I just like wasn't listening super good at the end, but I didn't like it. I thought it was just like whatever. Read it for the smut. It was an easy, quick read, and I think the audiobook was actually a really enjoyable experience. It's available on Hoopla if you want to give this a go, see what all the hype's about, but it just wasn't the best, and definitely overhyped. So that's it for this video. Those are all the things that I read in June. If you could, leave me a comment down below letting me know what your favorite book was this month and if I should give it a go. I love you guys so much, and until next time.